That access is restricted. I'm going to have to ask you to step away from the door." The voice was young, barely past the crackle of adolescence, but it was filled with the unshakable certainty that only a freshly minted uniform and a sliver of authority can provide. Sophia Brown stopped, her hand hovering just inches from the glass door of the Marine Corps Exchange. She turned slowly, her gaze calm and steady. Before her stood a lance corporal, chest puffed out, an M4 slung loosely but purposefully across his torso. His digital camouflage was still crisp, the fabric stiff with newness. He couldn't have been more than 19. "I'm just heading inside," Sophia said, her voice even without a trace of irritation. She held up her Department of Defense identification card, the one that designated her as a retired veteran. "I have access." The young Marine squinted at the card, his eyes flicking from the photo to her face. Sophia knew the look. It was a mixture of suspicion and procedure, a cocktail he hadn't yet learned to serve properly. She was a blonde woman in her late 30s, wearing worn-in jeans and a simple grey t-shirt under a striking red leather jacket. She didn't fit the mold he had been trained to recognize. "This is a veteran ID," he stated as if she were unaware. "It gets you on base, gets you into the exchange. It doesn't get you into the uniform shop during restocking hours. That's for active duty personnel only right now." "I see," Sophia said. "The sign on the door says open." The lance corporal's jaw tightened. He was losing control of the interaction and didn't like it. "The sign is wrong. I'm telling you the policy now. Please step aside." He gestured with his chin toward the main concourse. A dismissive flick of the head. A few passers-by, other Marines and their utilities and family members with shopping bags began to slow their pace, their curiosity piqued by the quiet confrontation. Sophia didn't move. She simply stood there, a picture of placid patience. This wasn't the first time. It was a familiar dance of assumptions and corrections. Her quietness, her unassuming posture was often mistaken for weakness or confusion. It was a mistake people rarely made twice, but the first time was always tedious. The young Marine, let's call him Miller, took her silence as defiance. "Did you hear me?" His voice rose a notch, drawing more attention. "I need you to move." From a few feet away, his fireteam partner, a slightly older corporal named Davis, ambled over. "What's the problem, Miller?" "This lady thinks her husband's ID gets her into restricted areas," Miller said, his voice loud enough for the gathering onlookers to hear. "I told her it's for personnel only." He hadn't even registered the retired status on her card. His brain apparently short-circuiting at the sight of a civilian woman arguing with his authority. Sophia's gaze shifted to Davis. She said nothing, letting Miller's accusation hang in the air. The accusation was a common one, a go-to dismissal. It was easier for them to imagine her as an accessory to service, a dependent rather than the principal. Davis at least took the card from Miller's hand and actually looked at it. He stuttered the name Brown Sophia M. He looked at the rank listed under her photo, Sergeant Major. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly, but the reflexive doubt kicked in. A Sergeant Major. This quiet woman in a leather jacket. It didn't compute. Sergeant Majors were legends, old and grizzled figures who walked with the thunder of institutional memory in their steps. They were men almost exclusively. He'd never seen a female Sergeant Major who looked like she could be on a fitness magazine cover. "This isn't an unusual ID," Davis said, his tone more cautious than Miller's. He was trying to be tactical, to de-escalate while still holding the line. "We see a lot of fakes, sophisticated ones. Would you mind if we ran it? Just for verification." "You can run it," Sophia replied, her hands now resting loosely in the pockets of her jacket. The posture was casual, but it allowed her fingers to brush against the cool star-shaped metal that lay hidden in a specially sewn in her pocket, a silent reminder of a different world, a different life. Miller scoffed, snatching the card back. "Yeah, we are going to run it. And you're going to wait right here. Don't move." He strode over to a small guard post 20 feet away, a shack with a scanner and a computer terminal. Davis remained with Sophia, shifting his weight from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable with the public nature of the stop. The small crowd was growing. A gunny with hash marks up to his elbow stopped, arms crossed, watching the drama unfold. A couple of young lieutenants, fresh from the basic school, lingered near the food court entrance, pretending to check their phones. This was becoming a spectacle. So Davis started trying to fill the awkward silence. "You were in the Corps," He asked it with the same tone one might ask about a summer job from a decade ago. I was, Sophia said. What was your MOS? He pressed. A standard question used to trip up imposters. 0369, she answered without hesitation. Infantry unit leader. Davis blinked. That was a grunt MOS. He looked her up and down again. Slender but with a wiry strength visible in her forearms and the set of her shoulders. Still an infantry sergeant major. The first women had only graduated from the infantry course a few years ago. The timeline didn't seem to add up in his head. His suspicion hardened. Right, he said, the single word dripping with disbelief. Miller returned from the shack, a triumphant smirk on his face. Well, what do you know? The system says it's a valid ID, says you retired last year. He slapped the card against his palm. But you know, the system can be hacked. Things can be faked. A sergeant major in the infantry. That's a pretty tall tale. He was enjoying this. He was the gatekeeper, the defender of the Corps' integrity against what he perceived to be a fraud. Every word was an escalation. Every gesture a performance for the audience he'd cultivated. Let me ask you something, Miller said, stepping closer, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial, intimidating whisper. You know fraudulent wear of rank and insignia is a federal offense, right? Impersonating a sergeant major. The real ones don't take kindly to that. We could have PMO down here in 5 minutes. PMO, the Provost Marshal's office, military police. It was a direct threat. He was accusing her of a crime. Sophia's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes shifted. A deep, profound weariness. She'd survived ambushes in the Sangan Valley, IEDs on the roads of Fallujah, and the crushing politics of the upper enlisted ranks. And here she was in the sunshine of a peaceful Tuesday on a stateside base being threatened by a child who smelled of bravado and cheap energy drinks. Miller noticed her jacket again, the vibrant red, a stark contrast to the sea of green and tan around them. He reached out, his finger almost touching the leather before he thought better of it. Nice jacket, he said, his tone mocking. Real tactical. The touch he almost made, the sneer in his voice, it triggered something. Not a memory of anger, but of a different time, a different place. It was a flash echo, a ghost of a sensation. The heavy oppressive air of a hangar, not in North Carolina, but in Afghanistan. The weight of her dress blues feeling foreign on her shoulders after a year in camis. The polite applause of the assembled brass, a 4-star general, his chest, a rainbow of ribbon stepping forward, the cool, heavy silk of a blue ribbon being draped around her neck, the weight of the 5-point star, and the gold eagle settling just below her collarbone. She remembered the silence that followed, a silence more profound than any explosion. She remembered her unit, the survivors, pooling their money afterward to buy her that red leather jacket. So we can always spot you in a crowd, Gunny, her platoon sergeant had said. His voice thick with emotion. They didn't call her by her new rank yet. To them, she was still theirs. The jacket wasn't a fashion statement. It was a memorial. It was a shield. Back in the present, the sun felt hot on her face. The moment passed. Miller was still talking. His words a meaningless buzz, but across the concourse, the gunny who had been watching, Gunnery Sergeant Reyes, had pushed himself off the wall. He was a lifer, a man whose face was a road map of deployments. He hadn't paid much attention until he heard Miller say the name out loud to his partner when he first ran the ID check. Running a check on a Sophia M. Brown, Miller had said just loud enough for the quiet gunny to overhear. The name had frozen him in place. Brown, Sergeant Major Sophia Brown. There was no way. Not the Sophia Brown, the hero of Firebase Kilo. The legend they told boot lieutenants about to scare them straight. He had been a staff sergeant at the regional command when the paperwork for her Medal of Honor had come through. He'd read the citation himself, his blood running cold at the sterile official language used to describe an act of impossible courage. He watched Miller threaten her, saw the condescension, the utter catastrophic ignorance of the two young Marines. He felt a cold dread mixed with a white-hot fury. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a sacrilege. Reyes didn't walk over. He didn't yell. That would just make the scene bigger and further humiliate a woman who had already endured more than any 10 Marines. Instead, he faded back into the shadows of a nearby alcove, pulled out his phone, and hit a number on his speed dial. His thumb trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a potent cocktail of adrenaline and reverence. The phone was answered on the second ring. Sergeant Major's office. "This is Gunnery Sergeant Reyes," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I need to speak with the base sergeant major. It is a code red emergency." There was a pause. "Gunny, the sergeant major is in a brief with the company." "I don't care if he's in a brief with the commandant himself." Reyes cut in his voice like gravel. "You tell him that Lance Corporal Miller and Corporal Davis are currently harassing Sergeant Major Sophia Brown outside the main exchange. You tell him I said her name. He'll understand." He hung up. The cavalry was on its way. And the two young Marines basking in the glow of their imagined authority had absolutely no idea of the storm that was about to break over their heads. Inside the base headquarters building, a sterile, quiet place of polished floors and framed photographs of past commanders, Base Sergeant Major Evans listened to the frantic whisper from his aide. He was a mountain of a man carved from granite and discipline, and he rarely showed emotion. But as his aide relayed the message from Gunny Reyes, the Sergeant Major's face went blank with shock, then hardened into a mask of cold fury. "Say that name again," he commanded, his voice a low rumble. "Sophia M. Brown, Sergeant Major." Evans stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. The colonel commanding the base, who had been in the middle of a sentence about budget shortfalls, stopped and looked at him, startled. "Sir," Evans said, his voice tight with a control that barely contained its rage. "We have a situation at the main exchange. We need to go." "Now, what is it, Sergeant Major?" the colonel asked, rising to his feet. "Pull up the service record for Sergeant Major Sophia M. Brown, retired." Evans barked at his aide, who was already typing furiously. The file flashed onto a large monitor on the wall. The colonel's eyes scanned the data. A list of duty stations that read like a history of the global war on terror. A litany of awards. Purple Heart with 2 stars. Bronze Star with Valor. Navy and Marine Corps Combination Medal. And then at the very top of the list, the one award that made every other pale in comparison. Medal of Honor. The colonel's breath hitched. He looked at the citation summary displayed below the award. Phi-Base Kilo Sang District repelled a multi-pronged ambush single-handedly, defended a casualty collection point for 3 hours. He looked at Sergeant Major Evans, his face pale. Is she the one they call the Ghost of Sang?" "She is, sir," Evans said, grabbing his cover from its stand. "And 2 of our newest Marines are currently treating her like a trespasser." The colonel didn't need another word. "Get the cars. Let's go." Back at the exchange, Miller had reached the apex of his arrogance. Having found no support for his theory of a hacked ID system, he had moved on to a new strategy. Procedural harassment. "Look, I don't know who you are, but you've caused a scene," he declared, puffing out his chest. "You're being disruptive. I'm going to have to ask you to leave the base. Your privileges are revoked pending an investigation. Hand over the ID card." This was his final fatal overreach. He was a lance corporal with no authority to revoke base access for anyone, let alone a retired sergeant major. He was inventing policy, drunk on the attention of the crowd. Sophia finally took her hands out of her pockets. She looked at him, and for the first time a flicker of something other than patience crossed her face. It was a profound, aching pity. "Son," she said, her voice quiet but carrying an immense weight. "You need to stop talking right now." But Miller was too far gone. "Give me the card, or I'm calling PMO and having you escorted off in cuffs for creating a public disturbance and failure to obey a lawful order." It was at that precise moment that the whisper of tires cut through the air. 2 black government sedans and a matte green Humvee swept into the parking lot, pulling to a halt with military precision just yards from the unfolding drama. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. The doors opened in unison. Out stepped the base commander, a full-bird colonel with an aura of command that seemed to warp the air around him. Out stepped the base sergeant major, his face a thundercloud. They were followed by a small command team, including a sharp-looking female captain who was the base public affairs officer. They moved as one, their heels clicking on the pavement in a sharp, intimidating rhythm. The entire scene froze. Miller and Davis snapped their heads toward the arriving officers, their jaws slackening, the color draining from their faces. They looked like statues of pure terror. The colonel and the sergeant major ignored them completely. Their eyes were locked on Sophia. They walked directly to her, their pace brisk and purposeful, stopping exactly 3 feet in front of her. And then, in a movement so sharp and unified it seemed to create its own sound, the colonel and the sergeant major snapped to attention and rendered the most profound respectful salute Sophia had seen in years. Their right hands sliced through the air, touching the brim of their covers, their bodies rigid, their gazes locked on her with an expression of pure, unadulterated reverence. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Sergeant Major Brown. The Sergeant Major's voice boomed, echoing across the now silent concourse. It is an honor to have you on our base. The colonel lowered his salute. He said, his voice filled with a deep sincerity. On behalf of every Marine on this installation, I apologize for the welcome you have received. It is unacceptable. He then turned, his eyes finding Miller and Davis, who looked as if they were about to be sick. The colonel's gaze was not hot. It was arctic. It was the kind of look that ended careers. He didn't speak to them. Not yet. He turned back to the crowd, his voice rising to address everyone present. Most of you here were in grade school when the events of Firebase Kilo took place, he began. But you should know its history. You should know the legends of our cause. He nodded to the Sergeant Major, who produced a simple laminated card from his pocket. He cleared his throat and began to read. The President of the United States of America, authorized by Act of Congress, March 3, 1863, has awarded in the name of Congress the Medal of Honor to Gunnery Sergeant Sophia M. Brown, United States Marine Corps, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of her life above and beyond the call of duty. The words fell like hammer blows into the stunned silence. While serving as a platoon sergeant in the Sanjan district, Afghanistan, Gunnery Sergeant Brown's patrol was ambushed by a numerically superior enemy force. With her platoon leader and platoon sergeant killed in the initial volley, she took command, exposing herself to withering machine gun and rocket-propelled grenade fire. She moved between fighting positions, reorganizing the defense in directing fire. When the casualty collection point was targeted, she single-handedly placed her body between incoming fire and 3 wounded Marines, sustaining multiple shrapnel wounds while continuing to return fire and render aid. For 3 hours, she repelled wave after wave of enemy assaults. Her actions directly responsible for saving the lives of 7 Marines and preventing her platoon from being overrun. As the Sergeant Major spoke, Marines in the crowd, from the youngest private to the oldest Master Gunnery Sergeant, began to straighten their postures. Their hands, which had been in pockets or holding phones, fell to their sides. Their expressions of idle curiosity transformed into looks of awe and profound respect. Some of the older veterans in the crowd, men with faded tattoos and scars of their own, subtly rendered salutes of their own. When the citation was finished,